Hey everybody, it's Wahome for Wahome Gitonga Coaching. Welcome to another episode of Business Conversation Interviews, where we interview the most successful people from across various industries, from influencers to coaches, to authors, to business owners, entrepreneurs, and a variety of other successful people from across various industries, as I explained. And so today we're lucky to have Samantha Abrahams. Now, Sam is one of the top UK coaches in terms of specializing in life coaching and family coaching. And she's a qualified hypnotherapist and specializes in cognitive behavior therapy. And she's going to be sharing with us her pearls of wisdom and key insights into how to, create a successful family home, how to, increase our confidence within the family, and how to, master our mindset and start achieving big results, not only within your family, but outside your family. So without further ado, let me welcome Samantha. Hi, Sam. Can you hear me?
You made it.
Hey.
I can.
Perfect. You finally made it. Perfect. Okay. So Samantha, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you. It was me.
And yeah, I'm really looking forward to interviewing you. So we'll start with the first question. So can you tell us about yourself? What is your background and how did you decide to get into your business?
That's a tricky question. My background, I started work years ago in business administration, and I fell in love with it as soon as I started studying and everything. I fell into that as a field, love with it, worked from being like a student into management with that, and then I had my son, and everything just changed. I didn't fancy that idea after I had going back to work in the office or anything. So I retrained then and fell into social work, largely inspired by my mum. She was a social worker and she kind of started following the feminist movement and suffragettes and everything. So by nature, I was helping proofread her assignments and everything. I just, again, kind of fell in love with that as an idea. When it came to actually studying and doing the, forgotten what they called it, placements for social work practice, I fell out of love with the idea of being a social worker, but I wanted to be in the field. So I played in that field for a little while as an agency worker while studying. And then I started working in a children's refuge and then later a children's secure home, which essentially feels very much like a children's prison. And fell out from that into working again in a children's residential setting. So essentially like a children's assessment centre, which in itself was a bizarre thing anyway. What had happened is I'd left the secure home, gone on holiday for a month, came back, and then went to work in there as an agency in a children's residential centre, which is supposed to have been set up for like a 3-month assessment and then help them return back home by working with the family and everything. And what happened was when the children actually met in the secure home, so the children's prison, actually resided in this home. So that just struck me immediately. And I stayed doing that for a long time. Again, worked myself up into management and essentially kept finding gaps in services, finding that as a niche and working my way into management with that. And I did that for the best part of 20 years. So I went from, I guess, residential settings into working in child protection and then parenting, specialised in parenting for a very long time, and then became a manager in there until I was coordinating parenting programmes across the borough. And I did that for a little while and then come to realise, as much as I love the actual face-to-face work, my values and the organisational values were just very different. And that was for a number of reasons, not least because I think by then I trained in everything there is to know, or that I was interested in, I should educate myself. The things I was interested in doing in terms of making changes and when you're working in any organisation, you're working towards their agenda and their remit and what have you. So where I could see that something different could be done, there was a lot of conflict for me, I guess, internally and within the organisation anyway, because every organisation has a particular way of doing things. And for me, it was no longer working. And I could see for the families I worked with or the individuals I worked with, it wasn't working because it was limited in its own approach. So here I am, I can do it in a way that fits them, in a way that offers more than one mode of doing anything and get some changes for them.
So what was it, the actual idea behind your business that helped you then create your own practice, and what was it that attracted you to that part of coaching? Because obviously coaching or being a therapist is a broad spectrum. So what was it that attracted you to focus on being a life and family coach?
Probably because that's what comes naturally to me. It's the thing I know and have most experience in. And it brings me joy. It's not just about doing something for work. It's important to me, and that's something I invoke into my work, is that when we spend so much time working, it's important to take something in terms of joy from the work we do. And so I don't feel like in the morning when I wake up, oh my goodness, I'm going to work, or I've got to go and work. I enjoy what I do. So that was a huge part of it. The other part of it was, again, I don't think I would feel fulfilled in any way if I wasn't directly working with people. But what I come to the realization I couldn't do was also work to an organizational agenda. It has to be about the person and what they're doing and what they need and what their requirements are. And if you're working within any organization, that's always going to be the case. So coaching gives me that freedom, but also gives the people I work with the freedom of opportunities and choices and everything.
So what was the biggest challenge you personally faced when you started your business, and how did you manage to overcome it?
My biggest challenge, I think it's that very thing. It's coming from working with an organisation to a team, to essentially being the team and having to make these decisions and do everything that is required when you're first starting out in anything. You start small and it grows, right? So that's how back into it. Everything I fell back into was me, and the extent of that was speaking to colleagues or friends who do similar work, or speaking to my supervisor, but everything. So that was a challenge in itself, into making sure I felt like I was making the right choices, again for me, but also for the clients. And I've got a family, so I've got to make choices that also affect them, and that's a big deal, to jump from the security as we see it of a job, a monthly paycheck, a pension, all those things, to taking risks by starting a business.
Well, I tend to find that with a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs, when they're first starting out, it's being able to manage their mindset that tends to defeat them, in terms of whether they suffer from imposter syndrome, where they think they can be a coach, or whether they just don't feel that they have the knowledge required to create the business. They let their fears get in the way. Like, what was the key for you in terms of being able to manage your mindset that allowed you to, continue to become the success you are, that could have derailed you if you had allowed it just to, be in charge or take control?
Do you know, almost the opposite. By the time I kind of made the decision to start my business 3 years before I actually done it alone. So I was doing my 9 to 5 and doing this in the background. And it became a thing where I couldn't do both. So that was the issue in the first place. I was being much drawn out of the 9 to 5 into doing this more full time. So that was a huge deciding factor for me. And so my mind was very much, when do I take the leap? When do I jump? When do I do this? Rather than how do I keep the perseverance going? By the time the 3 years had ended, I emotionally and physically had opted out of the 9 to 5 and was very much positioned in doing the business. And so it was a very different experience, but pretty much a lot of people I know and I interact with and even work with have that mindset issue. And it's because of those very things. It's the fact that we're positioning ourselves in a place of believing that we don't have something, or we're lacking some information, or we're lacking some skill, we're lacking the money, we're lacking something. And so we're approaching it from a place of deficit. And so my mindset has always been, I guess, me applying what I do with other people, is that I can't function well in doing anything if I'm approaching it from a place of deficit.
Like that. So what would you advise to someone who is considering or starting a practice, but they're just too afraid to make that first step?
Oh, that's a tricky one, isn't it? I say that because everybody's reason for that is so different, and often it's that thing again, it's that fear. It's that feeling of, I don't have this, or I don't have enough of something. There's a deficit feeling in that, and that's why the confidence comes with that, because fear and confidence go hand in hand in that way. And essentially, in a very cruel way, but not meaning to be, I would say they're just not ready. There's some more information they need. There's another skill they need to get. There's a team they need to get around. There's some mentoring. There's something else that needs to happen, because when you are ready, you feel confident to do so. You know you're taking the leap. You know you're taking the risk. It's a choice to do so. And anything that's stopping you, if any kind of level of resistance that's building up as a fear or lack of confidence, means there's something more that's required, or we feel that there's something more that's required. Half the time there isn't. There is no right way of doing anything. There's no right way of choosing the time of doing it. We're going to do it when it feels ready. And so it's less about lacking confidence. Is what do you need to feel ready?
Yeah, that's true. I like that. And I think in those situations, I think that's when, as you I think you mentioned about having a mentor in what you said, how it's crucial to have like a coach that can show you can show you the path that's been there, done that you can
Absolutely
look up to.
I mean, there's that, and I'm also somebody who's very much about be the trailblazer, do the person who does it differently. You don't have to do it the way someone else has done it. Take that information and you, again, like we do with everything, decipher what works for you. We've got to find our own feet in doing business, because that's what makes it work, is that we are essentially being ourselves and making it work for us. And that's what's getting the results.
So I know you mentioned this a bit briefly before, but what are the most common reasons why people come to you for coaching, and how can you specifically help people?
I think all of my clients will tell you a very different reason why they've come, but the thing they have in common is the thing that they're ready for a change. They've probably done therapy before, they've had a coach or a mentor before, they've tried everything they've known or feel able to try themselves, and then we're having a conversation about what it is they've tried and what have you, and we're doing something different. And that's the thing for me, is to be different in all of those things. It's that whole thing about when you try the same thing over and over again, you're getting the same result and you need to do something different. So I'll only work with clients who genuinely are ready to do this. They don't feel ready, we can work up to that point, but that's the kind of key thing, is that they're ready for those changes that they're ultimately seeking. And that's essentially what I invoke. Little mantras in our mind and little records in our mind about the thing we're lacking, the thing we don't have enough of, the thing we're deficit in, rather than playing to our strengths and knowing that actually we have all the skills, we just need the opportunity to play them out. And that's where the lack of confidence often comes from, is the lack of opportunity to see ourselves actively doing and achieving something. We're so busy focused on the thing we don't have, the thing we don't get the opportunity to do. And so it's wiping all of that, it's quieting that noise, it's providing opportunities, it's taking opportunities even.
And I know I saw in your bio that you spoke about your technique called the 3 C's.
Yeah.
How to create stillness. Can you explain that in more depth, and how that specifically can help people in terms of when they come to you?
I swear by the 3 C's: calm, confidence, and clarity, because often when we're feeling in that place of deficit, or we're feeling stressed, we're feeling all those kind of negative feelings that come upon us, that's the bit we're lacking. That's the bit that's missing. That's the bit that is in deficit, is those 3 C's. we're stressed, and so we don't have the level of calm, and with calm comes clarity. We're able to choices, we're able to decide, we're able to use information and do so confidently. So I support people to get those things in place. Life coaching, as you know, comes with a results model. One way or another, it's about results. And so it's not just having the conversation about doing something. I also use therapy as part of that process. So even from the very first session, I essentially map out with the clients what map they've been drawing, what map they've been following up until this point, and just by seeing it, they understand a bit about, excuse me, a bit better that's been holding them back. But then I also use another model where we're looking at where are we now in the midst of that before we move forward, because all of that stuff up until that point is their history, is their past, and the focus is moving forward and what is necessary to move forward. So I will use a number of different tools, i.e. I might use emotional freedom technique. If it's been a trauma that's held them back, I might use hypnotherapy. If there's fear or there's areas whereby the obstacle feels too hard to struggle and fight with as a conversation. So there's various things I will do to kind of quieten the noise of all those negative things we're saying, all those negative patterns we've got ourselves into, and create essentially a blank page or a new map for people to feel that there's possibility, not obstacles in their future.
I like that. I think that makes a lot of sense. Because I do feel that when I saw that, obviously, like, I think a lot of people lack the clarity about themselves, have the awareness in order to understand why it is they act in a certain way they do, or why it is they have beliefs in a certain way, or even understanding that a lot of the time their beliefs might not be their own beliefs, it might be from their parents, or they have their own beliefs that then passed down to them, and then they've adopted those as their own beliefs. So I resonated with what your 3 C's, and I thought, that's very true. So like, my next question to you is like, what advice would you give to like children or young people who are kind of like struggling to overcome and let go of a past experience, that are looking to move forward from it, but that's also affecting them in terms of how they're shown up within their family home?
It's a tricky one for a child to manage, honestly, and I probably would resist even having too much of a conversation with a child. And I say that because of my history in working with children in the first place. One of the most difficult things for a child to manage generally when they're in dysfunction, or again struggling with those issues in the first place, and they come in a range of ways, as you know. If the environment we're putting them back into, or they live within, hasn't changed, in them a situation where they are more aware of how difficult that's, or all the other things that again are impacting them, without the tools to make anything really different. A child doesn't have the authority, they don't have the power, they don't have the resources to affect change in a wider sense that a parent or an adult. So it's great that there are resources for children to go to and have those conversations, but essentially it's less about the child changing, it's about the adults around them creating an environment that allows them to thrive. A child can't create an environment for themselves to thrive in. They can just use the opportunities that they have access to, whether it's school or extracurricular activities or relationships they have outside of the home. We're still placing them back to their home, and they still have to find a way to function. And so the best thing we can do, I guess, is arm them with resilience, so that despite what those issues are, they have a thriving opportunity. They have an opportunity to make the best of all the resources and the relationships they have outside of the dysfunction or the neglect or the abuse or whatever else is going on for them. And it doesn't even have to be any of those things. It could just be a position where they live and have in poverty. All those things have knock-on effects for a child, and so making them more aware of that as a situation isn't helpful, I don't find.
So going to my next question, so what would you find is like the key in terms of for parents to create an environment at home that not only supports the children to, you know, an environment that really supports the family and helps the children grow and create that kind of happy home. Like, what advice would you give to parents? Like, because obviously there are a lot of parents out there who are struggling to create those environments.
There's a lot of things I'd say, honestly. I think as a basic kind of foundation is to give themselves the time to understand what it is to be a parent. I think often we're parenting from a place of fear in itself. All the things that we've experienced that we don't want our child to go through, all the things we hear in society that we don't want our children to go through. And so that is the driving force behind how we then parent in our parenting styles and our approaches, which is different to giving a child opportunity, letting them see the greatness and the things that they can become, because the two messages are very different. And in terms of creating a family environment, that is the key. It's not to feel as a parent that we've got all the skills, because we don't. No one person has everything. It's very much about embedding family in friends, knowing what your support network is and what everybody's skills are within that. Because it might not be every conversation or piece of information a child needs, or the nurturing that they need can be from a parent. Everybody's got a role in it, as they say, it takes a village. And so it's using what's in the community, it's building those friendships, it's letting your child see that you're actively a part of something bigger. All of those create a foundation, whether it's through your culture, through your religion, through societal values, whereas volunteering, all those things is what create a whole person in terms of being a child and creating home and giving them a sense of identity. Because essentially those are the things that those are the key skills a child needs when they're growing up, is to know that regardless of what else there is, I have a sense of who I am and where I come from and things I belong to, and that gives us a moral compass. And without those things, there is no sense of identity, and a child feels lost, and they'll look for that sense of identity elsewhere. And that's the greatest gift any parent can give their child, is the sense of identity. Knowing even basic things like, what does their name mean? Why was it chosen? Where did it come from? All of those things really make a difference to a child, knowing that they come from something, that they have meaning, that they are loved, that there was some thought process behind them, and all the things that make a person feel safe, I guess. Those are really important small foundations to give a child.
And my next question to you is, what would be the key that you'd say to people in terms of for families, in terms of like being able to improve communication skills and create communication skills that are open and honest? Because obviously that's tend to be sometimes a massive issue within families, you know, in having those strong communication channels.
That is it, and that's why I kind of go back to using who's around you. As parents, it's not everything a child is saying, doing, feeling, acting into that we can have a conversation about, because we're all carrying our own stuff. So we as parents will say, you know, tell me everything, tell me anything, or tell me everything. But the reality of it is, there are some things that just make us feel uncomfortable and we're going to react to. And the child knows this, so it's not everything they're going to tell us anyway. But because it's important to me, I want my children to talk to me about everything. And so I have to be aware that everything they're going to tell me, I'm not necessarily going to like, I'm not necessarily going to agree with. And so I have to hold that in mind. I'm genuinely not going to be a fan of some of the things I hear, and I've got a son who's 22 nearly. So I've been through that whole teenage stage, and he's doing things that I would cringe to tell my parents if I was him. But he's able to have that conversation with me on the premise that he knows I'm going to be open about the fact I don't like it. But I also have to trust in the fact that I've given him those very things I've spoken about. And that is key in parenting, is to trust and know that everything we've been able to do in terms of giving them the information and resources, the nurturing, the sense of identity, all those things, you have to at some point let go and trust that they're there and that you've input them, and you'll see evidence in that in how your children show up in their own lives when we allow them that kind of freedom. But it's not everything we're going to be prepared to hear. And if we want to hear it, we need to make those adjustments in self and agree that that's something we're going to be able to do, is to just listen without responding, listen and make a pact with yourself to say, okay, this is something I genuinely don't like, it makes me uncomfortable, and do that work. Why is it making you uncomfortable? What is it that is stirring within you? Is it a fear? Is it bringing up something for yourself? Is it that you're worried they might go on to do something else that's more scary? There's so many things that come with parenting. But communication is a huge one, and we just need to sometimes admit that we're not the one to have the conversation with, and find someone that we know and that we trust that the child can have that conversation with. Or again, there are mentors, there's various resources that we can pull upon knowingly and trustingly to do those things. And we can't take everything on, because parents don't have everything. As much as we'd like to, we just don't.
So what would you give in terms of advice for parents to having these conversations? Because not everyone, there's some parents out there who find it hard to relate to their child or be able to approach this have those conversations with their children. So they find that obviously too hard. So what would you advise them to do in order to start those conversations with their children?
Do you know what? It's funny, I say this to parents all the time, and then all the answers are always different, but it's that thing about casting your mind back to when we were young. Some of us would have been able to have more free conversations with our parents, and some of us wouldn't have been able to for whatever reason. And so it's casting your mind back to the fact that all of us at some stage needed a place to have those conversations. And we would have gotten information elsewhere that might not have been helpful, with the absence of being given the right information, being given the right support. And so that comes first. It's not about what as parents we want to hear or we want our child to do, because we're very good again at posing our thoughts and our feelings on our children. It's just being able to just listen to what the child is saying and decipher, is that what they're saying? Have a conversation whereby you're clarifying what they're saying, that you've understood it, rather than trying to steer them in any particular direction. Again, have you thought about this, and what do you think will happen if blah blah blah? Because we're concerned, and that's rightfully so. But if we can just hear the information, it might be more useful for the child to hear. Actually, there was a time when we went through, or we have a friend or a cousin or auntie, whoever, who also had a similar situation, because then it removes all the pressure away from here's what you should do. It just gives an example of here's what could happen if. It opens a conversation where the child can come back and have an extended conversation, or say, I thought about it and what you said and that example you gave me, and have again revisit the conversation, which is very different to don't do that, because we're again very good at doing that part. So it's genuinely being willing to hear what's being said rather than steering the conversation anywhere, and just sit again in the stillness, in the calm, and make the clarity happen, so that we can give a child. There is half the time we're trying to give answers when actually what we can do is give them the tools to find the answers themselves. So it does depend on the situation, but it also does depend on how able we are to hear the information too.
And going on that, so in terms of when it comes to like parenting, what specific advice would you give? There's no manual that comes to how to be an effective parent. And so what would you give advice of people who are struggling with, identifying themselves as a good parent, and what are the, tips you'd provide them in terms of like, becoming a better parent, or even understanding how to be a parent that creates like a good environment, a good family home environment?
You know what? About halfway through my career, I had this gem, and I run with it to the bank. Honestly, I'm trained in probably nigh on 75% at least of all the parenting programs available in this country, and a couple other ones, and they all have different ways of teaching parenting. So that in itself is a message that there is no right or wrong way of doing it. And the other thing is, and this I've tried and tested a million times, if we get parenting right 20% of the time, the child's going to be okay, and 20% isn't a huge amount. And I say that in terms of being well-rounded and being able to say we're sorry or explain, you know, things didn't quite go, or even the fact that there's even learning as parents takes away a lot of the pressure. Everybody's got an idea of what it is to parent, and there's nothing like being even pregnant or expecting a child than being thrown truckloads of advice and having to decipher it, and then you're worrying about your own experience of being parented, and reading all the books and every video and taking on all this advice and just creating pressure unnecessarily. The big thing is, have a relationship with your child. Learn from them. They'll give you cues, and enjoy it, because the rest will come.
Yeah, I think what you're saying there is really good, because I do feel like, you know, I mean, I'm not a parent myself, but I know plenty of other people who are parents, and
Right.
they tend to often struggle with how to become a good parent, or how to, you know, relate to the children, especially nowadays. You know, I don't know, when you're trying to relate to younger kids, it can be quite difficult. To keep up with them, and know how to build those relationships. So it leads me on to my next question. So what would you give us tips for people to, you know, bring the family closer together and actually increase that bondness between parents and children, and so you have like a good family backbone?
Is find those things that are really important and kind of skip away everything else. And that kind of goes back to your previous question. Half of the reason parents struggle genuinely with their children is because they are trying to somehow mold their child into something rather than learning who their child is. Children naturally, from the time they're born, give us cues. They cry for a reason. And you'll speak to mums over probably the first 6 months, and they will tell you they know the cry sound, whether their child's hungry, they need their nappy change, they need picking up, they need the cuddle. That is the same throughout life of parenting. Is that when they're having the terrible twos and they're screaming and they're having a tantrum and all those sorts of things, they're communicating through their behavior. They don't have the words to put to what they're feeling. And it's about us picking up on those cues and being available to pick them up. Not, oh my goodness, I'm embarrassed because you're doing this in front of people and all that other stuff. Just be in tune to your child. They'll tell us everything we need to know just with their behavior, and we can arm them with language as they get older so they can explain those things to us. And that is what builds communication. That's what builds a sense of identity. Because children are naturally curious creatures. They will ask you, why do we do this? And why are we, you know, why are we going to this church or this temple or this place? Or why are we having company with these people? They naturally do that. And that's where we embed everything, because children are like sponges. They're already doing that naturally anyway. And so we're feeding them a sense of identity. We're feeding them that warmth. We're feeding them nurture just by being how we cuddle them, how we teach them, how we read to them. Our very communication is what creates the level of warmth. And if we're so busy focused on trying to be a good parent, trying to be good in the eyes of whatever that is, because we're constantly comparing ourselves to either another parent or what our family says, our friends say, what society says, in trying to be a good parent, we're losing sight of the child who's most important. And so creating a foundation, that sense of identity, is very much about us instilling those values and knowing what of those values is it I want to teach my child, and then making them child friendly.
Oh, that's yeah, I like that's really good advice again you're giving there. So going on to my next question, what is your one of your favorite client success stories and why?
Oh, I have a million. I have a million.
What's one recently that kind of like stood out for you in terms of like how the client was before and then the result for them after working with you?
Probably just realization, self-realization. As I was saying before, clients generally come at the point of not only were they ready to change, they're already thinking there's something wrong, there's something missing, something doesn't fit, they want more, or they've had this experience, it's had this lasting impact. There's always something in that place, if not all of the above. And so just literally by changing perspective, so there's a lad who's probably actually the same age as my son, which is what made it more interesting for me anyway. But as you before mentioned earlier, is that he had a lot of negative messages from his parents. Very little to do with him, but actually his parents are split up. So one of his parents was kind of filling him with, "You're just like the other parent, blah, 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 blah," out of fear again, because he thought the other parent was saying something. So this child had grown up essentially into a young man now, gone off to university, has gone back home, and constantly revisiting, retelling themselves all the things they heard growing up about all the things they can't do. It became a script. So despite the fact he'd gone off and got a master's and he'd had windows of knowing joy, his overall record, he was playing worried. He needs to be worried about getting the bills paid. He needs to always be worried about what everybody else is thinking. He needs to always be comparing himself and all this sorts of stuff. And literally, I think halfway through our session, so we had about 12 sessions, and by the 6th session, I was getting phone calls about, he'd had a conversation with his parent, which he, in his mind, had built up to going to be a complete blow up. They're going to probably never speak again and everything else. And so, again, with conversations about fear and confidence and what it was he was going in with. I came out from that conversation completely blown away and surprised, because the conversation he was in control of, the conversation he was prepared for by having our sessions. And so it changed the whole outlay of the conversation that he had with his parent. His parent was able to apologize and take responsibility and accountability and not even recognize that it was having this impact. And it's taken 22 years to get to this conversation, which I don't think we naturally do unless we can step outside of a situation and look at it. And when we're in it, we don't get the opportunity to see. So that's where coaching or therapy can be so useful, is to step outside of it and see it. And that's why mapping and that sort of thing is really useful, is that when we step outside of the situation, and again, we see the clarity in a calm manner, it has a different shape. It has less of a power over us. It does so much to disenfranchise all those things. So it's amazing to see someone who phoned me at one point, considering the fact, or using again language where he was naming himself like, "I'm spiraling, I'm suicidal, I'm very low," into "I'm ready, I'm excited, I'm high, I'm going to get this job, I'm going to," all these things. It's like "I'm going to," rather than "I can't." The whole language, everything that came with it has changed and shifted. I don't even want to say tenfold, it's just a different person altogether. And those are my favourite stories, is to hear and see and be party to what happens when someone doesn't have those anymore, when they don't have the deficit mindset, they don't have a mindset of "I'm going to compare myself to anybody," and just to be comfortable being themselves and trying things out. And if they don't work the way we expected it to work, that's part of the journey. There isn't a destination we're going to name as happy or success. That all of it is part of a journey, and we're going to enjoy it. Those are my favourites.
That's a good. I love those kind of stories. You can clearly see like the value offered, and also the massive transformation in the client. That's what makes it worthwhile.
Yeah.
So going on to my next one. What do you feel is the secret to a happy child?
This is going to be a very unpopular but it's freedom. Freedom to be a child. We are so busy as parents trying to stop them from falling over, or stop them from having the wrong friends, or stop them from being molded somewhere else, that we're so busy molding them that we don't allow them just to be. Children naturally just come with some sort of character, and we see that in just the way they smile and they get into mischief and all sorts of stuff. And it's having that freedom of getting that balance right of freedom, between freedom and being kept safe, the freedom and being allowed to be themselves, and that being okay, and being not labeled, because we're very good at doing things like, oh, don't do that, that's naughty, and don't do this, and all those things we're doing, we're giving messages to our child from the early onset. And the happiness comes when we're doing the very opposite and saying, actually, okay, it's mischievous, but that's a willful child, or that's a powerful child, or that's a leader because they can stand up and they can do all those things with confidence. Those are things we want a child to have. Those are the things that create confident, happy children. But we are so busy, so focused, so trying to be a good parent and have a good child, that we mold that out of them. Happiness comes when a child is allowed to just be a child, and they're allowed to ask questions, and they're allowed to explore, because that's what a child fundamentally is being about, is exploring the world until they get to a point of they've got all the tools to navigate it well.
Love that. I love that. In difficult times that we're currently experiencing, what are your best tips on how you are able to stay motivated, that you can then give as tips to people?
How do I stay motivated? Because, do you know what, I say this to people ask often, I always struggle with it as an answer, because I'm on the other option is debated. The other option is to be miserable. The other option is to be depressed or anxious or stressed, all those things. And for me, those are never an option. There's no good that comes from us being in a bad place, or feeling bad, or thinking bad about ourselves. No comes from it. The energy that comes with that, we can completely harness and switch around and say, if I'm stressed or I'm anxious or I'm apprehensive, that I'm excited, because it's all energy. And when we call it something different, it becomes something different. And so I can never say to myself with honesty that I'm demotivated, or even, like, you say, mindset in itself is a constricted word. It means your mind is set to be something. And so if we add negative words to that, we become that. If we're saying I've got a negative mindset, then my mind is set to be negative. And so it's having a conversation with ourselves about what are we saying to ourselves, because whatever we're saying then is going to become the rest of our day, the rest of our lives, how we live out into our future. And so I start the day with that, and probably that's where my tip is to use that first half an hour of waking up well. In that very moment of that first half an hour, our brain hasn't woken up yet. It hasn't started to judge and perceive anything. And that's the greatest time we can set our day. And so I'll tell myself in that day, even if I haven't really got anything planned, I'm going to have a good day. And just from that, I was repeatedly tell myself that. And then I say to clients, it's something I do every client, regardless of what they're coming to me with. I talk very strongly about that very half an hour, and we talk in detail. So I won't take up this whole interview talking about it, but it's called the theta state. So I encourage everybody to go and look it up. But that first half an hour when we wake up, and the first half an hour when we go to sleep, is the most powerful time for our brain, in that we can literally tell it what we're going to do and make it happen. And I say go and look it up, because it sounds very simple, but it's very much a true thing. And so what we tell ourselves in that first half an hour and that last half an hour creates our mindset, it creates our day, it creates our behavior and our thinking patterns. And so yeah, that's my tip. Go and look up theta and start doing that.
I like that. So are there any resources that you can recommend people in terms of books or podcasts or tips that can help people in around with mindset or confidence, that could be used for maybe the family or children?
I have a very short book. I have to actually, because to bear with me while I look it up in my phone, because I've got a million by the same gentleman, and I'm going to forget exactly which one this was called. I think it's called The 7 Laws of Success, but I'm going to check it. I listen to this at least once a month, but it's probably over in the best part of an hour. I listen to these sections, I take notes and the whole bit, because 7 Spiritual Laws of Success by Deepak Chopra. I listen to it purely because when we have, again, I'm talking about what we do with our brain. So when we're reading anything, we're actually hearing our own voice, and we're having a conversation with ourselves, despite what we actually hear our own voice as we're reading. When you hear someone else's voice by listening, we're listening from a different plot. And so I chose to read the book and then listen to it on Audible for a very specific reason. We are not naturally set up as human beings to live in the society we live in. And so things like technology, even our phones, everything, we're not actually evolved in a way that was part of how we were supposed to live. And when we strip away all of that stuff and start thinking about how we busy ourselves with those things and are going back to being still and being calm, when we create a small space, it doesn't have to be a big one, a small space, just to acknowledge where we are. In that calm space, we can acknowledge also the things we're happy with, things that bring us joy, the things we want to change, acknowledge that we have the power and the control to change them. And so that book offers that to me. And so I share that with pretty much everybody. And that's the thing that allows me to keep my mindset the way I do and to function the way I do, is that when we skip away programming us somewhere, it allows us to be and acknowledge everything for what it is.
I like that. I like that book.
And to see that,
I'll definitely check
right?
that myself.
So, but I swear by it, and I say that because it can speak to anybody. It doesn't have to be that you share his beliefs or anything else, because he doesn't talk from a place of religion or anything else. And so why he even calls it spiritual laws isn't about spirit in the sense that we acknowledge it or speak about it sometimes. It's literally a conversation with self. And that, again, for everybody will mean something different. But it allows us just to focus on taking the good from each day. So there's parts where he'll say, wake up in the morning, like I was talking about setting the day. He doesn't say anything like that. He just says, make a decision to not judge anything that comes. So regardless of whether you get a phone call telling you that you've not paid the Sky bill or whatever the thing is that we're dreading or even looking forward to, if you don't have a preconceived notion of what it's going to be, whatever it's going to be will just be. And it's how we react to it is going to make the difference. And it's embedding all that to everything in life. So yeah, that's a book I highly recommend.
I think people will find a lot of good value in that. So we know what you're very good at.
I hope
One personal
that
you're not very good at in your personal life.
A hobby I've become very good at.
That you're not very good at in your personal life.
Oh, knowing when to stop sometimes. I'm a very much ideas person, and so I will run off in a tangent with these creative ideas, and then I have to physically tell myself to stop because it's all not doable in a day, or it's not all possible in the time I'm kind of thinking that it can do. I will just say, okay, I'm going to, and my husband will testify to such. I will decide all of a sudden I'm going to decorate the whole house and give myself like a week's window, despite the fact I've stripped the walls bare and everything else, because I've just got this idea about what it is I want to do. Because again, I'll keep that mindset, everything's possible, so of course it can happen, right? And then you start doing it and realise it's taken 3 days to do one room. So things like that, I've taken stock of, and I'm constantly working on, because I have to, I just keep peace and just say, okay, if I want to do the whole house, start with a room, don't do everything. But it's things like that. I just bubble constantly with these ideas and creativeness, and I enjoy that. And because I enjoy it, I make them happen anyway. But it doesn't have to be necessarily in the time that I give it. I have to stop giving things time and just say I'm going to do the thing and do it, which kind of goes back to, I guess, coaching and in that whole thing in the first place, is that when I'm doing that, we use all these various models about being time and being realistic, and I do that. But then I also think, actually, because I can call this to person and I can make it happen. When I take most joy actually just doing it myself, and so I need to give myself a realistic time to get it done myself, right? Which I don't always do. I just think this bit's gotten boring. I'll call someone else to finish this bit. So yeah, I need to be less out there with my creativity.
This is 2 questions in one. What is next for you in terms of your practice? How can people reach you to work with you? Like, so what social media are your handles for social media, or what's your website information?
Yeah. So my website is Sam Stood Still. You can literally put that into Google and it'll come up everywhere. My handle, I probably go on, and I use Instagram more than I use any other social media. That's my happy playground. I put up pictures and quotes and everything else, which again speaks to me being creative. So I use that. I am Life Coach Sam with an underscore in between each word. And you asked me one more question.
So what's next for your practice?
Next for my practice, expansion. I think at this point, I kind of find a little happy place in being applying all of those things. I think what I used to do was get very hung up on being in a particular place and running particular programs and what have you, or trying to create bespoke programs. And I've come to realize, as much as that it has been hugely successful, the other part of it is COVID taught us actually that's not necessarily the case. We're all adjusted to COVID very differently, and as we're approaching new normal, it means different things for different people. And I've done more work online now than I ever have done, because people are reaching realizations about where they are, where they have been, or where they want to go, which is very different. And so that's probably what's next, is to look at where I go next in more detail. And that for me really means doing more complementary therapies and marrying that up more with the life coaching, rather than offering life coaching as a standalone. That's what I used to do on request, because people say, oh, I need a life coach, and so I'll be explaining to them what the services were and fill it with that gap. But actually it's beneficial, and I've been doing that now for the last 4 months. It's just a standard, extending it in that way. It comes with everything, and so when they buy the package, that's what they get everything. And so it's giving more space for that to happen.
And what's the final question? What's one final piece of advice that you want to give people that have watched this interview and they are kind of, what's one final piece of advice you want to leave with people?
Listen again at a different time, or read again at a different time. And I say that purposefully, in that every time we take in any information, we react to it. We don't give ourselves time really to digest it. Or if we do, we read it consistently all the time and we just keep taking the same thing from it. Give yourself and give the thing, the information. Go back to it at a time when it's at that from it. And every time we take something different from it, it has more benefit. And that could be this interview, going back and look at it differently.
That's it. So Sam, it's been a real pleasure to interview you today. Like, you've given us lots of key insights.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I think that's going to really benefit everyone who's watching this now and will watch this later on the replay. So if anyone else is watching, there will be more other business conversation interviews coming up, so keep an eye out for those on Instagram and Facebook.
I'll be looking at myself.
Otherwise, Sam, we look forward to seeing you continue growing and your practice growing. Otherwise, it's been a
Thank you.
big pleasure to interview you and actually finally get you down to be able to do an interview.
I know, right? I'm here. We made it. Thank you so much. It's been brilliant.
So wish you best of luck and have a great week.
You too.
And I'll speak to you soon.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye, Sam.
Bye. Some of the names of